Beautiful Timmins day out there. I woke up and just in the quadrangle back here, just I don't know how many ravens and at least a couple of nesting pairs of hawks, and it was a really nice way to feel welcomed. And apparently there's an eagle's nest, but nobody will tell us where it is. So keep your eye out. There's some good wildlife around. My name's Steve Lindley. I will be your MC for the next couple of days. I'm not very good at it. I don't know why they keep asking me to do it, but nonetheless, I'm going to have fun, and hopefully you guys will have some fun. Just quick acknowledgement that we are guests, some of us anyway, are guests on the traditional territories of Matagami First Nation, Flying Post First Nation, Metechwan First Nation, and many Ojibwe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Algonquin, and Métis people. So we feel very respectful, and we will treat each other with respect while we are on your territory. So thank you for having us. Just a quick introduction. I'm a senior advisor. I'm an independent consultant. I'm a senior advisor working with the Atkins Realis team on the Webequie-Sapali Road and Northern Road Link. And I feel very honored to be able to attend gatherings like this, to be with people that are going to help us understand some of the issues that we need to address on these projects, and there are many. So thank you for sharing in advance, and we'll do everything we can to try and respond to the issues and concerns and positive aspects that you bring up over the course of the next couple of days. I'm from Toronto. I don't always like to admit that. I've spent most of my career working in the north of Ontario, as well as some of the far north, but a lot of time in the north. I was actually the environmental lead on the Five Nations Energy Transmission Line project, and was extremely honored to be in a meeting in Fort Albany. All the elders had gathered from the Mishkegowuk communities to talk about the transmission line, and this was during the environmental assessment phase. And after a day of discussions, the elders gave us authorization to proceed with the project, and it was one of the most amazing things that I've ever witnessed in my career, just sitting in a room with the elders saying, this is for our future generations, and we'll help you mitigate impacts, and the benefits, net benefits outweigh the net impacts. It was really quite an experience. So I've spent a lot of time up and down the coast and always enjoyed it a lot, have a lot of friends in the coastal communities. Anyway, like I said, I'm from Toronto, as are a number of other people in the room, and we were all on a flight. I won't name the airline, Air Canada. And a half dozen of us didn't get our luggage. A half dozen of us. So they give us this emergency kit. It's got toothpaste, toothbrush, this little deodorant stick that you can hardly see. It's like this big. No comb. I mean, I'm like this in the morning trying to get my hair. And they have a fabric freshener. A fabric freshener. So I figure you'll be able to tell the people in the room that don't get their suitcase and have not used the fabric freshener sometime later today or tomorrow. So once you find out who those people are, and one of them is me, you just want to keep your distance, maybe. Anyway, we've got a busy day, and I just want to do a little shout out that there are passports, or that's not what do we call them passports? Passports, that you get stamps for visiting the different tables up here and talking to some of the analysts that are able to share knowledge with you about the projects. And there's also a workbook, and there will be a draw. There will be 2 separate draws at the end of the event. We're not quite sure when that will be yet. We'll work that out over the course of the day. A number of us have to fly out at 4:30 tomorrow, so we'll play that a little bit by ear. But if you get all those stamps on your workbook, on your passport, you're eligible for the draw, and you're eligible for the draw on the workbook if you pass it in, because we're going to be able to take some of those comments as notes from the session, so it's important. What other housekeeping? We're going to start with project overviews, and we're going to move into a panel discussion on engagement. So we have a lot of ground to cover today, and we look forward to your participation. I don't think we have much more than that, and maybe if I could ask, having a blank. Ryerson, sorry. If he could come up. Ryerson is an impressive young man, a member of Curve Lake First Nation, and a knowledge keeper. He's going to help us get started in a good way.
I think you're short. Anin anyway magne dok me jabe madznini dijne kaze mi kana kamino ani ki benesi do them ko tegma me washki ma don zba nishna be oji be buru adam in and na digi to yan jaganashi emwin. Greetings everybody. I just want to speak in English language so everybody can understand me. I'm not too good with Cree language. Oji Cree I can understand pretty good, but Anishinaabe Ojibwe Potawatomi language is one of my first languages I learned as a little boy down home in Curve Lake in the Kawartha Lakes region. So I just wanted to acknowledge the territory we're in up here in Treaty 9. My partner's from up here, so it feels like I'm at home. She's from Matagami First Nation, and we spend a lot of time up here in the north, and it's very beautiful. And I respect a lot of the people that are up here and the culture that is being preserved, and the language is so really beautiful to hear so many language speakers up in the far north, and to know that it's still alive, and to know that the ways of Anishinaabe people are still alive up here. So, I ask our Creator that He sits in here with us today, and the spirits gather in this room, so that we can understand and we can listen to each other and have those good thoughts and those good feelings, because a lot of the time we forget about our future generations. We think about ourselves today, but what we do in the decision making and the information that we gather affects that little baby 7 to multiple generations down the road. That decision that we make and the things that we do affects that little infant. So when we hear these stuff and we gather information, we always think about that little person that's in that Tikanagan. So I just want to say that much for now, and I appreciate my time up here in Treaty 9. It's such a beautiful, beautiful territory. So Gachimi Gwech Nikanagana.
Yes, sir. You're worth it.
Damn. Hey, you want to move this down?
And some more.
Too?
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Can you help me with my wheelchair too?
You have a wheelchair. Is it power?
No. Can you push it for me? Thank you for helping us open in a good way. Let's be respectful. I know there's a lot of people that want to get their opinions across, and we're willing, and we're going to listen very carefully. But let's just all agree to be respectful and enjoy the day. So with that, I think we can probably get started. I believe the first order of business is to get project overviews. Is that correct? I don't have the agenda in front of me. Is that correct? And I believe the first project overview is going to be given by Kazim Sadiq from Shuslup. Ingrid's, I'm sorry, Ingrid. And they're going to talk to you about the I guess you're going to talk about the MF car, so the Martin Falls Community Access Road. And then we'll have presentations on the two other roads, Webquay Supply Road and the linkage piece, the Northern Road Link, that will connect the road between, well, I guess connecting to the highway and up to Martin Falls, and then a connector up to the McFalls Lake mineralized zone, and then the Webquay Supply Road, as you guys all know, will come and join at the McFalls Lake intersection from Webquay First Nation. So, Ingrid.
Mic switch, Steve. Okay. So my name is Ingrid Trimble, and yeah, I'll just give you a project overview on Martin Falls First Nation. So if I could please have the first slide, that'd be great. Okay. Can I have the next slide, please, and thank you? So as part of Martin Falls First Nation Community Access Road, we've got different people who are part of the project team. So as you can see on this slide, we've got Bob Baxter and Lawrence Baxter, as well as Rowena Muniz. So today with us, we have Rowena here, and all of them are part of Martin Falls First Nation. Next slide, please, and thank you. And as well today, we've got Qasim Sadiq, we've got Jennifer Bruin, and then myself as part of the team that supports the project. Next slide, please, and thank you. Okay, so we'll give you a little bit of a project overview, how the preferred road was chosen. We'll talk as well as a little bit on the draft environmental assessment impact statement, studies we've done, and what's coming up. I'm wanting to hear from you. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, what you see is a map. And on the map, you can see Martin Falls on the northeast corner, sort of like that purplish block. On the east side of the map, you see like a dotted line, and that's the current winter access road. And on the west side is the route that the community access road will be following. And the community access road will consist of a 2-lane gravel highway. There'll be also associated, well, you need to have gravel to be able to construct the road, and bedrock and such. You'll need, for construction itself, you also need laydown areas, right? Well, you can put your materials and, for example, construction camps and such things. And so all of that is part of the community access road. Okay. And bridges and crossings and other things. Okay, next slide, please, and thank you. So in order to be able to construct the road, you first have to get approvals, right? And so for the community access road, we specifically have to get both a federal and a provincial approval. And so we have to prepare what we call an environmental assessment and impact statement. So that's what we've been working on, and which we have now submitted, well, released to Indigenous communities. We've been working on this for quite a few years. We started collecting information since 2018, so it's been a long time. Next slide, please, and thank you. And one of the things that we were able to get last year was the preferred route, and we didn't just choose it as is. There were quite a lot of different components that went into choosing this route. So there had to be, as you can see on this slide, you've got all of the components, right? So we had Indigenous knowledge that fed that choice. And you had also environmental studies from water and people and the land. And, you know, we also had engineering inputs. And then at the center, we have the community of Martin Falls. Their feedback was very, very important to be able to choose that road, right? Because it's not called the Ingrid Road, it's called the Martin Falls First Nation Community Access Road. So they had to be at the center of that choice. And so we worked with the community to try to figure out, well, how do we best provide them with all of these inputs in a way that they could make that choice? Next slide, please. And so with that, in last year, in August, we were able to actually get the Band Council resolution in August of 2024, which was really exciting. And in that, what you see now on that map is basically the preferred road on which we use to be able to do the environmental assessment and impact statement. Next slide, please. Okay, and as I mentioned, one of the things that we're really excited about after so many years of collecting information and such is that we now have a draft. And what you see on this slide are the components of the draft. So we have the blue circle sort of on your right top hand says plain language summaries. So we try to make things that were easier to digest, to be able to share with community members, to give you an idea of like, well, what did we learn about, for example, like fish or vegetation or wildlife, right? And so that's part of what we prepared. You also have the big circle that says the draft environmental assessment. Well, it says draft EAIS. That's just the acronym for Environmental Assessment Impact Statement. And what we have in that one is basically, it tells you a little bit of a story of everything we've done. Yes, it is 1,000 pages long, but if we started working on this since 2018, there's a lot of things that we wanted to share, right? So we're trying to, in that document, we have a little bit of a story of like, who's Martin Falls? Why do they need this road, right? What kind of consultation did we do? There is also, how did they choose the road? And then summaries of, well, what did they learn on existing conditions, right? Like what did they learn for example, for rivers and lakes? And then what happens when you put the road on top of that? So that's the effects assessment, right? What kind of mitigation measures are they considering? And then cumulative effects. So we try to put all of that and try to explain it as easy as possible so that community members could understand it, right? And then the last circle that you see is that red one there. No es cierto. The yellow one, sorry, is the technical reports. So if you wanted to have more information, there are all of the technical reports. Those ones are a lot heavier, but they're also part of this submission. And then the last one, the red one, is a record of consultation, right? What did we hear? What did we hear from your community, for example, and for other communities and the public? So all of those are the components for this environmental assessment impact statement. And you'll see it, hopefully we get to talk to you in the breakout sessions, and we've got it in a hard copy, so that way you can see this draft. Next slide, please. And this picture here just shows you how much it is. I don't know if you can see it. So we've got Lawrence and Bob and Rowena. We also have Kasim, Jennifer, and another team member whose name is Joan. And so in the table in between them, you see all of the different components of the draft assessment. So it's fairly large, but it's just because it has so many components. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and so this slide here just shows you a little bit of the timelines, right? So right now we are in February. We just released the draft to Indigenous communities. We wanted, Martin Falls, as an Indigenous community, wanted to first share that draft with Indigenous communities before sharing it with the public and others. So Indigenous communities just received it. We've sent the electronic version first. Now, if you saw that picture with all of the different components, it takes us 2 full days to print that thing. So if your community asks for a hard copy, we will be sending it to you as soon as we have it, but it does take quite a bit of time to just print it and then send it out. But at least we wanted to make sure that communities were able to have the electronic version, and we're also sending a summary first. And then once the big thing is available, we'll send it your way. So that's in February. In April, so 60 days after Indigenous communities get the draft, the public will also get it, and that's when also the federal and provincial government can start reviewing the draft. And then everybody gets And then the review period ends in June for Indigenous communities and for the public. So at the end of the day, your communities get 120 days, so 4 months to review it, and the public and the government get it for 2 months. And then we'll use all of that feedback to be able to incorporate into the final and be able to release it to them again. Okay, can I please have the next one? This picture this slide basically just talks about how to be, as I said, we've been collecting information for a lot of time. So you can see on that big picture, what the gentleman is doing is he's setting up one of the hair snacks to collect information, in this case for Wolverine and whatever else was showing up to have a little bit of a nibble. But anyways, anyways, next one, please, and thank you. Yeah, and so this slide basically just shows you all of the different things that we studied, and we tried to, we divided them into, so the Indigenous knowledge, the technical one, so it's the engineering and the cost, and then we've got the people, water, and land, right? So that's just the way that we wanted to group them, to sort of reflect the different components. Okay. Next slide, please, and thank you. And yes, we would love to hear from you. So if possible, do sign up for the breakout sessions. That way we can share with you what the draft looks like and listen to what kind of things you're interested in, right? Are you interested in is it in caribou? Is it moose? Is it fish? Is it the waterways? So we would love to be able to talk to you, to show you what the draft looks like, and then to get an understanding of what your community is most interested in. So, yeah. Next slide, please, and thank you. So we talked about the review period, which is 120 days. In the spring, we're hoping to have another public information session in Geraldton. And then, yeah, we talked about the review period entering in June. And yeah, once we have all of the comments, we can then prepare the final. Next slide, please. And that's it. And this is the way to get a hold of us. And anyways, thank you very much. And we'll hope to talk to you guys at the breakout sessions. And I don't know who's next. I'm guessing Webekwe or Norm. Yes, it's probably you, Dawn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ingrid. Well done. And now we're going to hear a few words about the Webekwe Supply Road. Don Parkinson. He's very slow.
Thank you, Steve. I recognize that shirt from yesterday. It's 2 days in a row. I'm wearing my Air Canada shirt that I was given, and you were too. So, yeah, there was a shirt in the package, by the way. Just, yeah. Anyway. If we can bring up the presentation, please. Okay, I just wanted to give everyone a bit of a rundown on the Webekwe Supply Road project. We're almost at the same point as MF Carr, as Ingrid was describing. So I'll just walk you through where we are right now, and then we can take questions, I guess, after all the presentations are done. So, next slide, please. So just to remind everyone, the purpose of the Webekwe Supply Road, moving material, supplies, and people from the airport in Webekwe to the Ring of Fire area, providing local employment opportunities, economic development opportunities, of course, and then providing those experience or training opportunities for youth as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the actual project, the planned road is planned to be 107 kilometers long. 17 of those kilometers sit within the reserve boundaries, and the final corridor width is planned to be 35 meters. Next slide, please. We have 6 major water body crossings, the biggest one being that of Winnisk Lake, which is about 200 to 250 meter span. Then there's a few other ones. The most notable, I guess, are Winniskis's Channel to the south of the Winnisk Lake crossing, and then at the east end, almost at the end of the road, is the Mukkatai River crossing, and both of those are about 30 to 50 meters. And of course, these projects are not just the road. They have ancillary infrastructure elements, some being temporary, some being permanent. These include pit or rock quarry areas where you would have processing equipment to grind the stone down to the whatever size is required. And then there's, of course, access roads and crossings to get to these sites as well. There are 4 construction camps planned, pretty well equally spaced along the route. Typically, these would have storage and laydown areas for the storage and laydown of equipment and materials mentioned there. Next slide, please. So I know you can't see it in detail, but we do have some maps, I believe, that will show where the planned camp locations are. Most notably, we have 2 sites for construction material. These would be quarries, one of which is the smaller one. It's more of a secondary site near the Winniskis's Channel crossing. And then in the extreme southeastern area of the reserve lands is a very large deposit that would be the primary deposit. And both of those would serve the construction of the road and the operation for its expected life, which is planned to be arbitrarily about 75 years. Next slide, please. As you probably know, there are 3 projects in the area, all-season road projects. Webequie Supply Road is the northernmost one, running from the airport in Webequie, southeast to the McFalls Lake area, east of the Mukkatai River, where it would then connect with the Northern Road Link, which would then extend south to connect with Martin Falls Community Access Road, just west of Martin Falls, and then that connects down to 2 resource roads that would be upgraded, then ultimately to the highway. Next slide, please. So as you probably know, there's a regional assessment that's going on. This is a federal process, which is separate from our process. We feed into that process, but it is a completely separate process. Next slide, please. In terms of engagement and consultation, we've been, just like Ingrid, we've been at this for 7 years now. I think 7 years, almost 7 years. It's almost our 7th birthday probably, isn't it? It's coming up. So we've been doing a number of different types of things to engage the public. As you probably have seen, whether it's the website, which is the major repository of information for the project, the notices, the regular notices that go out, the in-person meetings. We've done internet shows or live streams, and we do radio shows. And the purpose of our various approaches is to try to reach a broad range of community members, to also educate community members on the process, so that they're aware of how comprehensive the environmental assessment and impact assessment processes are. So we're continuing to do that. We're open to visiting communities at any time, but we'll keep going with our radio shows and our live streams as well too in parallel. Next slide, please. So over the 7 years, we've heard a number, we've had well over 1,000 comments, a lot of them during the terms of reference period. And these can be grouped into a number of different themes, but some of the biggest themes are things like road ownership and policing, which sits outside of our scope, but is an important one. Steve and I have worked on projects, all-season road projects for 10 years at least. Well, longer for you, of course, but and we've much longer for you. And you know, this is probably the #1 issue that we get, and understandably. Security over the roads, to prevent over-harvesting, to prevent drugs and alcohol, additional drugs and alcohol from getting into the community. So that's always way up there in the list. There's the cumulative effects issue, right? Looking at all the projects together, the effect of the net effects of all of them added together, less the mitigation. That's a big one. Commercial or job opportunities is another big one. Downriver water quality, particularly the coastal communities here. Climate change is a huge one. We hear about this always when we go to communities. In Webequie in particular, selling gravel, taking advantage of the natural resources that sit within the Webequie reserve boundaries and selling that to supply the project. That's one that's been brought up. Treaty rights, of course. And then more drugs and alcohol coming in, which is closely tied to the ownership and policing or access issues, which is a complex one, which I believe is starting to be discussed, I think, at higher levels officially. It's been unofficially discussed for a long time, but now I think that's moving ahead. Next slide, please. So where are we now in the project? We're almost where MF CAR is. So we're in the process of just finalizing our draft environmental assessment report or impact statement. We are also doing in parallel a plain language summary of this document, which would be substantially shorter, maybe 40 to 50 pages, which we would then translate into 2 different languages, Ojibwe and Cree. And we're going to roll out of some other learning tools as well to accompany that, to help with the take-up of the report. And of course, everything will tie back into the main report. So, and then we will be supporting that with our own experts to be made available as needed. Next slide, please. In terms of the decision-making process, some of you may know, but in Ontario, there's a government review team, there's the review period by the Indigenous communities, and then the Indigenous communities, general public and stakeholders after that, and then ultimately it goes to the minister, and then there's 3 different types of decisions: approval with conditions, and refusal of approval. And then on the federal end, there's the impact assessment report, which is generated from the impact statement by IAC. And then it goes through a similar type of process as well, too. And then most importantly, in Webequie, they have to do their own internal discussion and decision-making when it comes to this project as well, too. They've been doing that, but that process continues. It's an ongoing process. Next slide, please. So, an important point to make sure community members and everyone understands is that just because the project receives permit approval doesn't mean that's the end of permits. There's many other permits that are to occur after that. There's compliance monitoring. There's all kinds of monitoring that goes on after project approval to ensure that the commitments are being met and that the predictions being made as part of the environmental assessment in terms of effects are coming true, and then dealing with those issues when things go a bit awry. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned before, the document will be coming out shortly. I can't give you an exact date yet. We're still working on identifying that date. But most importantly, there'll be that plain language summary to help serve as sort of a roadmap. We will be releasing them both at the same time because we don't want the main document out there without a tool to help navigate people through that document. So that'll be coming soon. Again, I don't have an exact date yet. Next slide, please. In terms of the schedule, ultimately we're looking for hopefully a decision in 2026. That's our tentative schedule right now. Again, it just depends on how quickly we can get that draft report done. So we're hoping that will happen in the next 4 weeks. I said hopefully. So anyway, that's the latest on the project. I'll be happy, and other team members will be happy to take any questions later on, and we can sit down and have some conversations and hear your concerns. Thank you.
And last but not least, Ange Brooks from Atkins Realis is going to give us an overview of the Northern Road Link.
And I'm even shorter than Steve. Okay, can I have the first slide? Actually, I might as well immediately put it to the next slide. Okay, thanks. So what we're going to talk about today, a few things. The study plans, the Attawapiskat River crossing, our alternatives assessment, a little blurb about cumulative effects, and then I will have Michelle from Dillon to come up to talk about Indigenous knowledge and Aboriginal treaty rights and interests. Next slide, please. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Northern Road Link, but just as a little introduction and background, it's a proposed all-season multi-purpose road, similar to MFCAR and WSR. It will connect to the Ring of Fire mineral deposits via the all-season highway network, and it will provide opportunities for Webequie First Nation to connect to the all-season highway. Next slide. So a little bit about our project team. We have Martin Falls and Webequie First Nation Chief and Council at the top of the circle, and supporting them we have the community members as a whole, and we also have a working group which is represented by 2 community members from Martin Falls, that's Lawrence Baxter and Alana Downey Baxter, and 2 members from Webequie, Roy Spence and Gordon Wabass. Our project colleagues are Qasim Sadiq and Mike Fox, and then we have in the lower right corner the technical experts, which are all of the consultants, Atkins Realis, Dillon, and a lot of others. Next slide. So we've seen this map a number of times. This is just showing you exactly where the Northern Road Link is. We have MFCAR on the far south, WSR connecting at the top, and then Northern Road Link is actually the link between those 2 roads. Next slide. So study plans, I said I'd talk a little bit about them, and what are they exactly? Well, they are key components of the environmental assessment, and they are required by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks as part of our approval of the terms of reference. So what is the purpose of these study plans? It's to outline methods that will be used to assess the potential impacts of the various alternatives, and it also includes methods for our baseline data collection, how we're going to analyze that data, propose modeling, and then our effects assessment scoping. These study plans have been prepared and shared with MECP. The fact sheets are available up on the website. Those are just summaries of all of them because the study plans are very long and technical. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a little map about our alternative Attawapiskat River crossings. We have 3 shown here. In actuality, we only have 2. So if we start with the one that's the furthest east, that's the crossing that's following the Esker. I'll get into the details about that in a second. The other 2 westerly crossings, you can see the far westerly one has the little red polygons in there. When we first identified the crossing, we weren't aware that there was potential sturgeon spawning in that location, and then from our field work and talking to community members, we were made aware that there's potential sturgeon spawning, so we shifted that crossing further downstream to be outside of that sensitive habitat area. So the east crossing, can I have the next slide? So you can see it's kind of a hard map to see, but that line at the top crossing the river was our original crossing location. And then once again, talking to Martin Falls community members, they asked us if we could shift it downstream slightly so that it would be further away from that little grouping of islands at the top of the drawing. And that's an important moose concentration area. So once again, we got input from Martin Falls and we shifted the stream crossing down to address their concerns. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to get into alternatives. This is a drawing of the Northern Road Link, and these different colors indicate the different alternative corridors. We have a lot of common corridors that don't have technically alternatives. Those are the ones, 2 in the south and in the northern section. Each alternative is 2 kilometers wide. That will allow us to move with it, once we choose a preferred corridor, to move within that area to avoid other sensitive features or sensitive habitats or put it on better terrain or whatnot. And our approach, actually next slide. So how do we do the alternatives analysis? Well, first of all, the alternatives analysis allows for a comparison of the advantages and disadvantages of the different segment options. That's basically the bottom line of what it is. We have a lot of data that we input into a computer model, and we can assign weightings and scorings to that data, and it outputs the results of which segment is more preferred than the other. We don't have that information to share yet because we're still working on it and we're refining the data and adding more data, and we'll be able to share that information with you shortly. Next slide. So this is basically a slide of the methods. Just as I explained, we input data, we assign scoring and weighting, we build the model, and then we review the output and rerun the model. So that's where we are. We've run it a couple times. We're gonna run it again because when we see the outputs, we realize we need to refine the data because the computer can only work with quantitative data. So we keep adjusting it and revising it to work properly. And then eventually we will get to the selection of the preferred corridor. One thing I want to mention in this slide that at any time in the environmental assessment, if there's somebody, whether it's a government agency or an individual or a community, suggests that we look at a different alternative corridor, that is something that we can do. And that's just a part of the environmental assessment. Next slide. So these are just some of the terms that we use in an alternatives assessment. It is a technical aspect. So we have factors, criteria, indicators, data sets, and I talked about weightings and scorings. Next slide. So this just gives you a little background, I guess, if you will, a little bit more information about what I mean. So we have 5 different factors that we work with in the assessment, very similar to what Ingrid was talking about with their valued components, how they've arranged them. This is almost the exact same thing. We have Indigenous land use and interests, natural environment, socioeconomic, physical and technical considerations, and you can see all the detail under there and how complex this alternatives assessment is. Okay, next slide. So this is just a little schematic of what I talk about with weighting and scoring. And so far we haven't applied weights, and each factor currently is weighted equally. But as we refine the process, we are going to assign higher weightings to certain factors that are more sensitive or more important, if you will. This is where we need feedback from community members and others so that we can have an idea of what's considered more sensitive, I guess, if you will, so that we can figure out which one of these factors we want to apply higher weighting to. Next slide. This is just another the multi-factor analysis. So I just pulled out the biological environment and Indigenous land use and interests. So under biology, I have moose and fish habitat, and then the indicators get down more into the weeds. So just as an example, we have area of winter habitat for moose and then area of aquatic feeding habitat. So that's what I mean when we need quantitative. So we need actual numbers. And fish habitat would be areas of water bodies impacted and area of high sensitivity habitat. And then under Indigenous land use and interest, just as an example, we have area of caribou habitat impact, number of hunting and fishing cabins, and areas of, planned harvesting or gathering sites. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a little information about cumulative effects. Cumulative effects is an assessment that's done more or less at the end of the impact assessment stage of the project. And what we do is we take any leftover effects that we have after we've applied all of our mitigation measures all through the impact assessment process, and we take those leftover effects and see how they will interact with past, present, and future projects within the region. We have, I think it's between 12 and 15 of these past, present, and future projects and areas that we have basically been assigned to the project by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada that we have to look at in the cumulative effects assessment. We have a map of them. I don't think the map is over there. It's one of the table maps. We'll have it in the breakout rooms so that everybody can have a look at it and see the projects that we're talking about, because it covers a wide geographic area. And if you have more questions about the cumulative effects assessment, because it's complicated and confusing, just come and talk to any of the project team members and we can discuss it a little bit more in detail. Yep, and I think that's it for me. And now I will have Michelle up.
Chimagwech Ant. Ani Bouzou, my name is Michelle Nasir. I'm a consultant with Diddon Consulting, working on the Northern Road Link project. I serve as the Indigenous Knowledge Program lead, as well as the Aboriginal and/or Treaty Rights and Interests assessment lead. Could I get the slides up, please? Thank you. So the Indigenous Knowledge Program is our program that is designed, and our attempt at being innovative in including Anishinaabe and Indigenous knowledge throughout the process. And our hope, because we're led by Webekwe First Nation and Martin Falls First Nation, is that through their guiding principles and their three-tiered approach, that we can work with communities to collaborate on this work throughout our environmental assessment process for the Northern Road Link project. What we have here on this slide is our depiction or showing how we're going to undertake the Aboriginal and/or Treaty Rights and Interests assessment by first utilizing Indigenous knowledge and weaving it throughout the process to end at the stage which we call our baseline condition setting. So on this diagram, you'll see on the left, we have what we're calling our existing knowledge base. Our existing knowledge base refers to communities' existing Indigenous knowledge and Anishinaabe knowledge that they would like to share with us. whether this be through previous work they've done on other projects or internally information that they've collected and preserved for future generations. This also, our existing knowledge base also includes looking at what's publicly available, information that's been validated by communities for different processes. So it could be for different projects that they've taken part in that are outside of the community that they were identified as being participant to. So that's our existing knowledge base. On the right, we have our project-specific studies. And our aim is, through our Indigenous Knowledge Program, is supporting communities in collecting project-specific information through what we're calling a project-specific Indigenous knowledge study, where we're hoping that based on like previous feedback communities have given to us, they can look at the study areas that we've defined with their collaboration and use that to address concerns about potential impacts that they might recognize in that area as a result of the Northern Road Link project. The other aspect of the project-specific studies is that we have display boards up here at our Expo booth, as well as at previous open houses, where there have been opportunities for communities to participate in our field monitoring programs or in our field studies as well. And that usually means that field monitors will travel with teams that are going in during the field season and participate with them, and that information as well can be the basis of our Indigenous knowledge base for the Northern Road Link, with the idea that that information would be validated with communities. And that's basically our basis for how we are going to be undertaking laying out the existing conditions or the baseline conditions for the work we're doing for the Northern Road Link. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here on this slide, we are showing our overall overview of our timeline for our Indigenous Knowledge Program. We also have a poster up there if you'd want to take a closer look later that shows the same timeline. And our aim is that we can communicate with communities, collaborate with communities, and work with them through this process. We're in 2025 right now, which is at the far right corner of this slide and this diagram. And what we're doing right now is continuing to do outreach with communities to have them participate in our Indigenous Knowledge Program in various ways. But mostly what we're hoping is that they're going to be sharing any traditional land use studies that they're willing to for this work. Our goal for the Indigenous Knowledge Program is not only to set our baseline conditions, but to also look at other information communities want to share. So it could be information related to potential mitigations that they want to identify, or even ideas about, that can go into our project design work. So that's where we're working towards at the moment. And what we're hoping is that, especially by the end of this year, where we're setting our baseline conditions, there's information that we can include that comes from Indigenous communities that they're willing to share. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here on this diagram, we've put together an idea of our valued components. Valued components to most who've been part of the environmental assessment process should be familiar. And especially, I know a lot of communities are coming to recognize terms related to that, especially if they've looked at earlier presentations or earlier work that Martin Falls Community Access Road is doing, as well as the Webequie Supply Road. So for us, in our understanding of our project's valid components these are the elements of the land, which is the water, the medicines, the berries, the fish, and the animals that form that part of that ecosystem. And we put in our work, led by our communities of Webakwe and Martin Falls, our proponent and who's guiding our work, we put Indigenous knowledge and Anishinaabeg knowledge in the center. So it is the information that we get from communities through the processes that they've decided that they want to share that information with, which feeds into all our valid components. So we've listed out most of them here, but for the Aboriginal and or treaty rights and interests work, our main components are Indigenous use of lands and resources, and cultural continuity and well-being. And those are our two valued components that we're using to assess for impacts and address potential negative and positive effects of the project. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our goal for the work that we're doing is weaving Anishinaabeg and Indigenous knowledge throughout our process. So as I mentioned earlier, whether it's through the environmental assessment process, whether it's through the decision-making that's happening as part of the assessment process, and as mentioned earlier, project design. So one of the things that we're hoping to do is support communities in raising awareness of the potential for impacts of certain developments in their area, and to, in a way, to support communities to encourage preserving Indigenous knowledge in various ways and to seeing themselves reflected in the environmental assessment that we're doing here. So our goal for the work that we're doing is not only to, consider and how we're considering Indigenous knowledge throughout our environmental assessment process, but also ensuring that the work that we're doing is deeply rooted in what the communities have wanted, what the communities need, and that the process is led by the communities in the way that they want to see it. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to share this afternoon, some of the team is going to be at the Expo booth in the corner there, and the rest will be in the breakout sessions, and we're happy to discuss with you as we move forward. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you to the presenters. We could take a few questions now. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. But I just want to also introduce, in addition to our project leads, we also have representatives from the federal and provincial governments. And if you wouldn't mind standing when I say your name. So from Indigenous Affairs Canada, we have Sita Chinadurai. IAC, sorry, Impact Assessment Agency. And Caitlin Phillips. And from Ontario Mines, we have Jason Frechette. Can you stand up, Jason? Like I'm one to talk. And Dorothy Mashinsky. Excellent. Excellent. I just wanted to make sure people recognize you. As you know, the agenda includes breakout rooms after lunch. We're still working out the logistics. I don't know that Ontario and Canada have a breakout room. So look the people up if you have questions for either of them. I don't know where you're going to be. Will you be in the plenary room during the breakout sessions, or what's your plan? So you'll be here in the Expo? Okay, so that leads me a little segue to the Expo. As you can see, we have display boards at the back. Each of the three projects is represented. And another shout out to the passport and workbook. You have to visit. Go ahead. An M&R. Excellent. Excellent. So we've got lots of good representation. and I'm assuming you guys will also be in and around the Expo area. So there's lots of people that can answer or try to answer questions. Anyway, back to the passport. Remember, you got to get all 5. So you have to have Ontario, Canada, and each of the 3 road projects stamped on your passport to be eligible for the draw. And you have to be here when we conclude tomorrow to be able to be eligible for the draw. Okay, we're still working out the logistics of the breakout sessions, so we'll get back to you at lunch about that. We're going to have a couple of questions, as I mentioned, then we'll have a break, and then we'll come back and we'll have an engagement panel, and then we'll break for lunch, and we'll give you an update on the breakout rooms over the lunch period. Okay, maybe the best way to do questions, I was just going to say also, the sign up for the breakout rooms, and that's why I asked Michelle to stay. Search out Michelle. So if you're a community or association or other affiliation, seek out Michelle to sign up for the breakout rooms, or you can also talk to the folks at the registration at the front, and you pick your time slot to visit with different projects. We may have communities fixed in one room and we travel around, or we may be in a room. We may be fixed in a room and visitors or guests travel around. We'll figure all that out, as well as the name of the rooms and where they're located. But the sign up is really important, so if you could do that during the break, that would be fantastic. There's also one other piece of housekeeping. We have a translator, sorry, I don't know her name. If you are interested in hearing the translated version of what's being presented, there are headsets that are available with the group at the table, the IT table here. And sorry. How will people get that? On the website? Put it on the website.
Yeah, I guess whatever websites would
Okay.
be.
Okay, that's good. So if you aren't interested in hearing the translation directly, you're comfortable in the English. There may be people in the community when you go back that might want to hear the translated version, and it'll be available at least on the website.
Well, we'll send out an email notification at some point.
Okay. But anyway, for those who are interested, there's headsets here, and you'll be able to hear our fantastic translator through the headsets. Okay, I'll take questions, and we'll have the representatives from the project teams. I'll just kind of distribute the questions. Don't be shy. We do have a mic. People want their coffee, I think. That's fine. Okay, if there's no questions, let's come back at 10:35. It says 10:45 on the agenda. Let's come back at 10:35 to give us maybe a little bit more time for questions and answers after the engagement panel. Does that make sense? Okay, we'll see you at 10:35.
Yes.
Here I am checking for feedback. Checking for feedback.
Okay, we're going to get started. If you wouldn't mind taking your seats. And can we get Kazim and Mike and Jen? Are you there? I see you, I think. Paging Michael Fox, paging Michael Fox. Okay, can we have your attention? We're going to get the panel started here.
Test it.
Hello?
Check your mic, Kazim.
Check, check.
Check your mic.
Wow. Deep seats.
I just want to get started. I was remiss in not knowing our fantastic translator's name, so I want to introduce you to Madeline Kaoki, who's providing our translation today. That's a really super talent. I don't know how you do it, and I take my hat off to you. And all the other translators that do simultaneous translation, it's really quite the talent. Okay, so once we get Mr. Fogg up here, we're going to have a panel discussion on community engagement. It's going to be moderated by Jennifer Ashawage Pereira. And we're joined by the project co-leads for Northern Road Link, Michael Fox from ICE and Kazim Siddiqui from SUSLOP. And each of them are also project leads. So Mike is also project lead on Webquay Supply Road, and Kazim is project lead on Martin Falls Community Access Road. And I'll turn it over to Jen.
Bonjour. Dabajamo Banashis Dishnakas and McDodam Chichigoning Donjaba. I'm Jennifer Ashawasage Pereira, and I'm from Henvey Inlet First Nation. And for work, I am an Indigenous consultation specialist for Atkins Realis. And I'm very pleased to be here in this really beautiful territory. And after the snow, everything looks so beautiful. It's one of my favorite places to be. So I want to welcome our panel. And the purpose of this panel is to talk about consultation and the activities, as well as the importance of consultation. Yeah, these chairs are way too comfortable. We just sunk right in. It feels like we're in our living room here. I don't think we'll fall asleep, Steve. I'd like to introduce Kazim Siddiqui and Michael Fox, and I'm going to read a bit of their bio for you this morning. So Kazim Siddiqui is the principal of SUSLOP, and Michael Fox is the president and CEO of Indigenous and Community Engagement. Kazim is a management consultant and economist. For the past 15 years, he's worked in strategy, sustainability, environmental and impact assessments, socio-economic development, and research in diverse industries. Kazim has had the privilege of working with different levels of government, industry, and Indigenous communities across Canada. He's led national, regional, and local research projects, which helped formulate policy that underpins socio-economic development and sustainability initiatives. He has also advised mining companies on sustainability strategy and Indigenous partnerships frameworks. So let's give it up for Kazim. And over to Michael. Michael's from Winisk First Nation, and some of you might recognize this gentleman. He is the president and CEO of Indigenous and Community Engagement, and he brings a wealth of experience in structuring projects and financing for both industry and Indigenous clients. He's a certified professional facilitator, a certified change management practitioner, and a certified professional Aboriginal economic developer. He's the co-chair of the Indigenous Affairs Committee for the Prospectors and Developers Association, or PDAC, and is the co-chair for the jury panel for the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program at the Canadian Council for Indigenous Business. And he also sits on the board for the Indigenous Centre for Cumulative Effects, the Thunder Bay Economic Development Commission, and is a ministerial appointed board member for the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation. So let's give it up for Michael. Welcome, Michael and Qasim. So we've been talking about Martin Falls Community Access Road and the Webequie Supply Road, along with the Northern Road Link this morning. And as you can imagine, these are really not small undertakings as far as consultation goes, and there's a lot of moving pieces to this. And it requires a good amount of consultation and engagement. So the assessment and impact assessment in Northern Road Link is into its 4th year. And as you heard this morning, the Webequie Supply Road will be releasing its draft soon, and Martin Falls is a bit ahead of us. And like I said, the Northern Road Link is about 4 years in. And so we've undertaken various kinds of consultation activities throughout the lifetime cycle so far of all 3 of these projects. And as I said, Michael and Qasim are the co-leads for NRL, and Qasim is the project lead for MFCAR, and Michael for WSR. So let's dive into the consultation pieces of this. So first, we're going to discuss the importance of consultation to all of these projects, and we'll start with Qasim.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. Beautiful day out there. You can almost see the sun shining bright, which makes me feel good at least.
And we have windows.
We have windows, yeah. Theoretical, but we still do. So the importance of consultation to the projects, certainly to Martin Falls Community Access Road as sort of the first project that I started working with was and is paramount. It has helped us define the project, ensure that the project as it continues to progress, develops a level of understanding between what the project wants to achieve and what the neighboring First Nations are willing to do with the project as well. So to get to that point where there's a shared understanding of the project, its intent, its purpose, its location, its impacts, how we mitigate those impacts, and then ongoing conversations around what do we do about impacts that we can't really mitigate completely. And fortunately, as a road, there aren't a remarkable amount of those, but there still would be some. And that is only possible, all of the above are only possible through consultation and engagement. Now, as an Indigenous proponent and trying to do it as one of the first projects, it also meant that consultation was very important with the proponent communities, with Martin Falls, and on the Northern Road Link with both Martin Falls and Webequie, to try and make sense of, what exactly does the proponent nation want to achieve for the project? And that's a really large, layered question. So you go through it one layer at a time. You go through conversations starting really broadly, and then you start to narrow in. And when it starts broadly, it starts with the purpose, the intent, the vision of the community. And you think you go in and it's a new project and people have new ideas. But it's not. The nation's been talking about it for every time I go into the community, people talk about it, that, I've been involved with this conversation for the past 30 years, for the past 40 years. Our parents have talked about this project for a long time. So these are long conversations at the community level. So you want to make sense of those. You want to try and understand them. You want to try and appreciate exactly what the intent of this is, what the hopes, aspirations, dreams of the community are, and that's where it starts. And as the project is now coming to a point where the draft is out, and hopefully the final would be released at the end of the year, to get to that point, to get that decision from the nation that yeah, this is the preferred alternative. This is where we want to go. We could not have gotten there without really strong consultation and engagement. First of all, with Martin Falls on the Community Access Road. And that was a remarkable process in itself. And I think Ingrid slightly spoke to it in a summarized way this morning. But just to elaborate on that a bit more, we did all of our technical analysis from the environmental perspective, from a socioeconomic perspective, from an engineering and cost perspective. And we thought we already had the indigenous knowledge required by the project to a certain extent was available to us. So we had that baked into the analysis as well to define certain decisions. But through consultation, we were able to fine-tune it quite a bit. And fine-tuning doesn't really moving it by an inch. Fine-tuning means, having a very deep and meaningful conversation on the crossing over the Albany, where people started talking about the visual aspect of the road and how it impacts their ability to continue to enjoy a really special part of their traditional territory. And that's something which can't be captured without those deep conversations. And I think that's a great example on what consultation has meant to this project. Same example with our neighboring First Nation to the south, Arrowland First Nation. We were not able to say that this preferred work. Still, we had those deep, meaningful conversations with Arrowland. And that took a while to sort of structure to ensure that, there's alignment at the leadership level, that they're willing and ready to welcome us. That was also a little bit of a process. Once we were able to do that, and then we were able to sit with the nation to talk about what had we done. They were very curious to hear what did Martin Falls say so far. So we talked about all the feedback, input, and direction we'd received in Martin Falls. Then we spent a lot of time getting their feedback on their concerns, on what they were willing to live with, because the road ends up in their traditional territory. So it's paramount for Arrowland to be aligned with the vision of the project, and paramount for them to say that, yeah, this works for us. This sort of ensures that our values are protected. This is a project that we can see as A, required, B, as something that we're willing to support as Arrowland First Nation. And once we got to that point, we were able to say this is a preferred. Without that, there's no long-term success for the project. So even at the initial stages, but if you think long-term sustainably, there's no success without that level of sort of meaningful conversation, and then decisions reflecting that meaningful conversation as well.
Yes, and as we move along, a lot of those conversations continue to be ongoing. It doesn't stop just when the draft is released. I just wanted to note that. And then move it over to Michael. What is your take on the importance of consultation?
Thank you. Miigwech. Wache. I was just looking at myself unfiltered. I usually have my filter on with my camera. And it's like, good to be here. It's been a journey for Webakwe because that's where it starts. The engagement with Webakwe, the consultation with Webakwe, and the definition of the project that they wanted, the definition of the purpose of what they wanted, and part of that is the reflection of their aspirations, and learning from others, but the hardest part, it took probably, I would say probably 2 years before the membership really understood that they're the proponent. Like even when we did other studies, other routes for potential all-season roads with 4 other First Nations, and that included Nabinimik, Niskanaga, and Ibamatu, and Webakwe, we looked at other routes. We had 9 different roads, but even in that process, the communities, the biggest challenge for the communities that it was like their road. It's not a third party, it's not industry, it's like the whole premise of our discussion is that what do you guys consider about a road? And there was already discussion about realignment of the winter road to a higher, drier ground. which is really an intern step to an all-season road. And then moving that discussion to a real road. And so that took about, I would say, 2 years before the membership got that premise. We're the proponent. It's an Indigenous-led project, and therefore, what are the principles are we going to follow? Right? What are the Indigenous principles, Webequie's principles are we going to follow? We understand the provincial principles, we understand the federal principles, but what are the Indigenous principles? And that had to work out. And based on those principles and our understanding of our neighbors, the shared land, the shared language, the shared culture, the shared history, what is our list of communities we're going to deal with? So they came up with their own list of 8 First Nations based on family relations, based on just the overall network, relational network in the area and what they knew. So that started off with 8 First Nations. The federal government came with 10 First Nations on their consultation list, and then and the provincial government came up with 22. So it was a larger cast. So right from the beginning, it was Indigenous envisioned and defined. And they looked at Five Nations Energy Inc. Like, how do they become proponents of a transmission? Another linear project. They looked at Wate Power. Here's another cluster of communities looking at an infrastructure play in the west side. And they looked at Victor Project, the Diamond Project by Attawapskat, and they also looked at Musselway. 2 different models, right? One, some would say it's the worst case scenario, for a mine operations, 11, 12 years, and very little for the community. That's one opinion. And then you got over 25 years of operations with 4 signatory communities of a gold mine and continuing, right? And the tribal councils being signatories of those impact benefits agreements, and all the enterprises and all the jobs that they're creating now, investing in Thunder Bay on hotels and stuff like that. So you have 2, call it worst case, best case, and they looked at those things, right? Like, okay, the lessons learned to our east, what are the best case on the west? Because there are 2 different scenarios. So it wasn't in isolation, from Webequie. Like, they got family members. Roy goes to ceremonies in Attawapskat, and he's always asking for airport rides and helicopter rides to bring family members back and forth. And they got family members on council on the other west side communities. The people moved away and married into other communities, so they're not in isolation. Like, they have a pretty good understanding where people's views are, and that's why they came up with the Webequie 6. I think the journey is a collective journey, a shared journey with the regulators, because they too, I think, were learning, in the beginning, and it kind of evolved, that it is an Indigenous-led project. The project description, the actual route for WSR was shaped by Indigenous knowledge. Steve and Don, when we were in the community, like the original maps, we had routes going straight down, the shortest route. But they were sacred mounts on the north-south route. And the elders said, and the members said, no, you're not going there. Okay, I guess we're going this way and curvy. That's why it's so curvy before it goes down. And we thought, I don't know, I did anyways, I don't know about the techno team. I thought they would go right down to Norance Road, but they said no. That would have saved us probably $10, $15 million of geotechnical work. But they said, no, we're not going that down south, we're gonna go this way. Because of the lakes that they had along the road. It was more north from that they wanted that road. So that's the difference, when you have an Indigenous-led project, that it was shaped by Indigenous knowledge and the community members right from the beginning.
Miigwech, I can really appreciate that because it's not an exercise of grabbing a map, a ruler, and a Sharpie and just drawing a straight line. There's a lot more to it than that. And I also like some of your comments, Michael, about taking 2 years to socialize the project in community, because in community, we have to decide if this is really something we want to do, because this is a really large, significant project that we have to consider every aspect of, because there's a lot of sensitive areas. So now I want to move into tools we've used in consultation, and there have been many, and we consistently try new things as well. So first I'll move it over to Kasim, and let's talk about some of those tools that are in your toolkit.
Yeah, I'm going to actually pick up on something that Mike just talked about, because I think fundamentally, and I definitely don't want to make it crude that I'm talking about it as a tool, but it really has had the value of a really effective tool, and that's the value of relationships between communities. And without those relationships, we would have struggled significantly in our ability to go and have conversations with neighboring First Nations. So I think at a higher meta level, I think one of the biggest tools at our disposal as a Indigenous-led project was the relations that existed between the leadership and membership in Martin Falls, in Webakwe, with all the neighboring communities, whether that was sort of neighboring communities like Aroland or Yabmatang, and the list goes on to about 21 First Nations. Those conversations, the enabler initially was absolutely that relational value that existed. I think without that, there would have been a dearth of consultation and engagement. Even with that, there was initially, as Mike talked about, the 2 years where Webakwe took time to ramp up to really understand what the project meant. I think we saw that on the Community Access Road once the project began. A number of communities around the project were I don't want to say hesitant. That's the wrong way of describing it. It was more about they weren't sure if this is a real project, if this is going anywhere. There was a sense of, let's wait and see. Is this really happening? And what is it that's happening? So I think as time went on, neighboring communities started to understand and appreciate the role that Martin Falls was truly playing, the role that Webakwe was truly playing, how this was an Indigenous-led project, what that meant. So just after that was established, then I think this toolkit came into play, which started with that relationship. And after that, it was a function of all the different things that we were able to do, keeping in mind that this is a really remote part of Northern Ontario. And when we started the project, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure, like telecommunication didn't exist, mobile networks were very basic. Even right now, they're basic, but now there's more mobile connectivity. And of course, like satellite internet changed the game in terms of access to internet at least. So with that came the technological capability to have conversations at the community level. COVID enabled all of it. As horrible as COVID was and all the personal toll that it left behind, it also left certain capabilities. So one of those capabilities was the toolbox for remote community meetings. I think that was remarkable. I could not have imagined that in like the beginning of 2020, that we could have a community meeting sort of live with satellite internet and community members sitting around the room and having conversations with social distancing and providing comments to the presentation that we just conducted to an entire place. So many communities took us up on that offer, and they would show up in a meeting space like this with social distancing, and on a screen like this, we'd come up and we'd present. And then there'd be a place on the side with a laptop or something, or an owl. Owls were a big thing. They were quite a tool. People would come up and sort of ask their questions, make their comments, and give us an opportunity to respond back to that. So I think that was sort of the cutting edge of remote consultation at that time. As things changed, of course, we pivoted back, and again, relying on those relationships again to have those direct conversations at the community level. So I think if I had to summarize it, that the unique tools that existed for this relationship were the leadership level relationships, the community level relationships, the need and desire on our part and the part of the First Nations to meet as frequently as possible through remote means, and then continue to sort of work in person wherever that was possible for the First Nations that wanted us to be there. And we've been keenly working with many communities around the project to ensure that, whenever they're willing to have us in the community, we're there. So at a high level, those are some of the tools that have been enabling for our projects.
I like what you said about the wait and see, because I think being an Anishinaabe and from my community, we have that going for us a lot. And I like to call that cautiously optimistic, because it sounds like a good idea. Are we going to be able to carry that through, and what will it take to get there? And then talking about the tools, like I said, we have some fun ones that we like to do for NRL and WSR, and that's a radio program and live stream. So those are two tools that I get to participate in, and that is really great. But I'm going to go over to Michael to speak to the tools being used in consultation.
Yeah, so WSR was under SIA 2012. We submitted it. That was the formal Canadian Environmental Impact Act. And then it got changed to the Impact Assessment Act. And so with new rules was new tools. It was like, so there was a different set of expectations from the federal regulators around what had to be studied. So there was more studies that had to be done, what I call people studies. They had to do not just the socioeconomic impact assessment, you had to do the human health impact assessment, you had to do gender-based analysis, you had to do country foods analysis, and indigenous knowledge. And so that required engagement and with people. And when you're touching people's livelihood like that, Webakwe knew in person. That was their first thing. Like that was, okay, we're going to do council-to-council meetings. We're going to do, nation to nation. And before COVID, it was happening. We were going into communities, and we're actually having, it's on the record consultation, but face-to-face meetings with the council. So that was the preferred thing. I think, of course, COVID happened. And it's still the preferred thing. It reminds me of, anybody use doctors here? You ever trying to get a specialist, and that specialist ends up being a video teleconference session? It doesn't feel personal, right? When I'm old enough to know, like, when you had a doctor's appointment, like, you go see them, and even with the 5-10 minutes with the doctor, you felt like you were being tended to. It's not the same with a video, right? When you're seeing a doctor over there, a specialist over their video, and it was just a little mold I had here. I was a little worried about there. I was like, also a dermatologist, like, we'll go through a video. I said, I don't want to do a video. I got to do a video, look at my little mold. Like, yeah, so like, that's how I relate it. You're talking about people's livelihoods. You're talking about people's landscapes. And so like, Webakwe knows, in person is the preferred method. But COVID happened. We did the live stream, as you said. We did video engagement, community engagement as well. Like, I think Fort Albany, they set it up. We had the OWL, whatever it is, that they were one of the few communities that actually had that, I think it was Terra Matadawabin, that set it all up. And we had, social distancing, and we actually had community sessions, and they gave their stated concerns at that point in time to that. So it proved it could be done. We did it in other communities, that people can engage through digital, even in the crisis of a pandemic like that. But now we're post-pandemic, and all the options are there. If they choose to not exercise it, that's a different question. right? Like if they choose, if their preference is in person, we're there. But if there's no preference, no response, no whatever, I said, there's nothing we can do. So we'll go old school. Do you remember old school where we would fax a presentation and go over that presentation on the phone with chief and council? It worked back then. It's like, and we offered that option. So going old school all the way to the new school stuff. But the preference for Webequay is in person. But that requires cooperation. We can't force ourselves into a community. Like there's a reciprocal duty that I call, and if they don't understand that, then I can't help them with that understanding. But our preference is face to face, and I think you were saying like it's a process that deepens, right? And you know, I know Winnis here. I did a door-to-door survey, you know, for another project, and that takes time. That took time. Luke Gall set it up. I had the elders. He gave me the map of all the, you know, the community map of the houses. These are where the elders are. You know, if you can talk to them first. With George Hunter was there as my translator, and I thought I can do 3 houses in the morning, 3 houses in the afternoon, 3 houses in the evening. I did 1. And I was like, okay, I gotta put more time into this because it was meaningful for them. You know, it was a company that wanted to do exploration in that area, and they just talk like as much as you want a professional one-on-one answer. Indigenous people, it's storytelling. In fact, one of the elders told me where I used to go with my auntie, and I didn't know. When I was a kid, that's where I went. It's like, no, you and your auntie used to go way down this lake, in the summertime. That was our summer grounds, like kind of thing. So, yeah, so it deepens. It's meaningful if Chief of Council allows it, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I like what you were saying, Michael, about old school all the way to new school, and the importance of having those in-person meetings and talking about, it's storytelling time, and it's a little bit more than storytelling as well, because when we go into communities as human beings, people want to get to know who we are. So we're not just there presenting this information and talking at people. We're sharing things with each other while we're going about this work, because that's another important aspect. And again, going back to being in Anishinaabe, and we've had projects in our communities, and it's nice to know who's coming into our community. So that's just that, I think, that added little touch there. And so the other thing I wanted to move into, you talked about it a little bit, is which activity do you find has had the most engagement? And both of you talked about in person. And so is there another engagement activity that has seen a lot of engagement? Qasim?
Yeah, there's definitely, just like anything in life, some things just resonate so much more than other things. I think that's been true for us as well. There is, at the end of the day, there's no better way than being able to do this. Being able to sort of meet in person, see someone, be shocked at what they actually look like in person, as opposed to on
Short.
a screen, or taller. It's like it makes it so much more real. Like we're sort of as human beings, we've like centuries of evolution that says you've got to have that in-person interaction. You've got to see the body language to believe if that's something you want to rely on or not. And there's just so much substance to being there in person. And so it's really hard to beat that and argue that that's not the best way of engagement, of consultation. So absolutely, whenever that's possible, whenever we're invited, we are extremely keen to do that, because it's just that's where the most meaningful conversation happens. And that meaningful conversation is also a tough conversation. That's a conversation where people want to talk about all the issues that they see with your approach, with your project, with the way you're doing things, and And it's sort of, that's the meaningful conversation, which makes you go, okay, yeah, if this is the case, how do we improve things? And that's how projects truly improve. So I think that's absolutely bar none. That's the gold standard for us as well. Then there's the other challenge for our projects being remote projects. But also, in addition to being remote projects, we live in the times of TikTok. We like those sort of 20-second bites that pack all the information into a single video and you're done. Like, people want to consume information, content, material in a very different way in this day and age. And you can't fight momentum after a certain point. So I think that momentum's been our friend as well. So whenever we do those videos, and they're not 30-second TikTok videos, they're a little longer, but we try not to make them 30 minutes, 40 minutes. We try to make them concise. We try to make them visual. We try to pack the core ideas into those videos. So that's had a lot of traction in communities, because if you have questions about, or your thoughts about a certain aspect of the project, and out comes this video, which we send to our stakeholder list, that gives you an update on it. We've seen a lot of uptake on that. We've seen people viewing that quite a bit. We've seen people commenting on it. Every time I'm in a community or at an event like this, PDAC's coming up next week at PDAC, people always bring those videos up. So I think that's sort of been my barometer for, yeah, that's one tool that's helped us get information out. And the more people know, the more they want to talk to us. So hopefully that's sort of a loop which feeds that in-person conversation. Yeah. So I think those are two unique things that I do. Well, not unique, but those are two really fundamental aspects of what's gained traction on consultation, at least for the community access road.
I appreciate those quick hits, because in these days, many of us have short attention spans, so we like those quick bites. And what about you, Michael? What are some of those tools or activities that you've seen the most engagement in for WSR and NRL up to this point?
In person, without a doubt. And you'll see the different range of opinions manifest on the floor, right? Usually the opposition group voices will come up, I won't even say opposition, concerned members of the communities will come up, and it's a lot, what the concerns really is premised on a number of things, right? So we try to tease out those premises, like what is it about that concern, and then I guess, I don't know, maybe people get irritated, with their own members. So these, like, the same community, and then someone will start speaking up. I want jobs, right? Like, I hear you about that, and that sounds like that's going to be taken care of. But I'm thinking about the youth. I'm thinking about the. So those community, like, where you get the best engagement is in person, and you can see the range. And then that doesn't mean that someone grabs the mic, because I did this. I don't know if you guys use Docmocracy, but I remember one session where the guy, it's always, sometimes the open forums become open season. They open fire on you, like, kind of thing, and it's always the same people, the loudest, proudest type of thing. So I remember doing a sheet of paper, like big sheets of paper. Are you in favor of the process, not the project? The process. Not in favor was the other sheet. Don't know, not sure was the third one. And the other one, I need more information. And I gave everybody dots. One dot. There was about 80-something members in the room. I said, go put your dot where you think, where it fits best for you. The majority was yes. I think it was 60-something dots on the yes, we support the process. So it showed black and white that the loudest in the room that had the mic was actually in the minority. It really did. But it's using those tools, that to see what is, because all I said to them, I just want to do a temperature check. I just want a temperature check. And this is how we're going to do it. these sheets of paper. I just want a temperature check. And to see if we're off or on, whatever kind of thing. So that's how, so to answer your question, direct engagement. I will say this, They Media, Tony, he helped us a lot in the online stuff. And the reality is project information is boring. It really is. It's technical, dry, it's boring. And putting it up on a social media, we had the website and then we're using social media to try to push that information. It did not get traction. It was kind of flatlined. Some people looked at it every time, because you can measure it. I don't know if you guys know of social media, the analytics, both on the social media and the hits you get, and which, so we had the idea, why don't we weave the community narrative? Why don't we weave the community story into our social media and drive traffic to the website? That worked, and you can see it. As soon as we weave the community stories with the technical story, it spiked. It actually spiked the amount of hits, impressions, hits, visits, and we can tell you where exactly on the website they went to visit, what they read, what they viewed, because it's all tracked. And so we use that innovation. We put more resources towards trying to get more community stories into our social media to grab people's attention, to drive traffic to the website.
Miigwech, one of my favorites is also in person. And having participated in some of the engagement activities in person in some of the communities, one of the things that we heard a lot there were, where's Webequie and Martin Falls people? Our community wants to talk to those guys. So we have that extra layer of personal touch, if you will, especially for Northern Road Link with the working group. And so we have members from Webequie and members from Martin Falls that will come and speak with community. And that's the really important part, because we want to have those nation to nation talks, so to speak, and also for the communities to tell us why they want these projects. Well, why are you doing this? Why do you want to do that? So I think that's another important part of engagement. And so now moving over to best practices. So what are some of those best practices and perhaps some of the barriers and even challenges to community consultation? And once again, I'll start with Qasim.
Yeah, the single biggest barrier for us, Jennifer, has been where we've not been able to go into the communities, has been a lack of, and I don't know it's a lack of what, but lack of something. It could be interest, it could be time, it could be that this project is just not a priority for that community, and we understand that. They, like every nation, has their own priority, as they should, and many communities make time for us still, and some don't, and that is the biggest challenge for us. Our inability to go and meet with all of the 21 nations has been our biggest challenge to date. Now, over the years, I think we've had a lot of, we've made a lot of progress. We've been to a vast majority of communities around the project. We continue to go back to a vast majority of them, but some First Nations we've never been to once, and that's not from a lack of trying. That's not from a lack of reaching out constantly. That's not from a lack of our interest and intent to be there, but like I said, I think every nation has their own priorities, and that's been one of our barriers. But the one thing I did want to add, which is the opportunity piece, and so far I've talked about in-person leading to the ability to talk about all the concerns. What I didn't say is that in-person's also one of the only places where I've had community members say to me, this is great. Like, this is absolutely, if we were Martin Falls, if we were Webequie, we totally get it. We would absolutely be doing the same. We want a community access road. We want to develop economic development opportunities. Those conversations only happen in person, for better or for worse. That's a conversation where people sort of dig deeper when you sit with them in person. And what I was really sort of pleasantly surprised by, because, just because it feels like you're constantly pushing up this big rock up a mountain, which is trying to get people to say, this preferred makes sense, or no, it doesn't, change it to here. And it doesn't really come that way. So it really, at one point, feels like you're just moving this big boulder up a mountain, and you don't know when the slope's going to become your friend. But eventually it does. And I saw that at one of our neighboring First Nations, where we were at that pivotal point where, moving beyond that stage, which was releasing the preferred, we needed to get beyond that stage because we were there. As Martin Falls, we were there. But we didn't want to do that without sort of having adequate conversations with a few key First Nations, which we hadn't had to that level, which made us comfortable. And we're finally in that community, we're finally having one conversation, and people start talking about, yeah, all of this really makes sense. This is exactly the way we would have done it. One member says it, and then another member comes up and says, yeah, exactly what she said. Yeah, we're so glad we're having this conversation, and we're so glad we understand where Martin Falls came from, because if we were in that position, we would have done the same. So I think that's another strength that I wanted to sort of talk about, that in-person gives you that sort of strength eventually. It gives you that sort of, that final check. And making decisions without that capability is, you're on precarious ground at that point, and it's not the best way to do that.
Okay, I'll throw it over to Michael. Your thoughts on best practices, barriers, and challenges.
So I've seen best practice in communities. There's some communities really organized, and as soon as we make the call, they book the hall, they give you the date, what the preference is, like bring this food, not KFC, Mary Brown chicken, like they know exactly what they want, how they're going to do it, and what's going to unfold. You're going to see chief and council first, and then you're going to have the information meeting. And then, so some of those, and that's James Bay communities, like, and inland communities. Then you have ones that, he was saying about the challenges. The challenge could go the other way, where they're saying, come back, but come back with all 3 projects. That's a challenge for us, because 3 different projects, 3 different teams, and trying to mobilize, and organize ourselves in those requests. We have 5 requests right now for those. All 3 projects to go to communities. 2 of them on James Bay, Hudson Bay. And trying to organize ourselves to do that, because they want us to go overnight as well. So it's not, because they want an evening, right? So you can't just fly in and fly out kind of thing. So I hear you on that too, Qasim. That's a challenge on that. But I think the best practice, I've seen best practice on First Nations. I've seen the worst, like just disorganized, disinterested, and I'll just leave it as that. And the best practice. I think the best practice too, and it sharpened our team too, is the regulators. So on the provincial level, MECP, like when they approved the terms of reference, they said, you're not doing 1 consultation report at the end of the process. You're going to do 3 progress reports. 1 at the notice commencement, 1 at the baseline, 1 alternative assessment. So that forced us, to ensure that we're following up, on any concerns, any issues, any impacts, any information requests. That's a best practice, and I give kudos to our provincial regulators on that, because it disciplines us. It really did. At the end of the day, like rather than at the tail end, it's actually throughout. Best practice there. The other best practice I would say is the collaboration with the federal government in trying to understand what they expect on the study plans, et cetera. I think that was kind of hit and miss, I think, before, and other projects I've been part of. And I think the other best practice is with the Ministry of Mines, where they offer, first of all, with the proponents, and that includes Martin Falls, but with WSR and CAR and later Northern Road Link, we signed a consultation MOU. The division of labor, an expectation between the Crown and the First Nation. That's because they knew this was different. Normally in Ontario, if you're the proponent, you would get a letter of designation. The letter of designation, delegation, sorry, the letter of delegation, where they say, here's the communities you have to engage with. Good luck. Webakwe said no. In Martin Falls, it said no. We're going to negotiate a consultation MOU, so it's clear who roles and responsibilities are around the consultation process. So that was an innovation and best practice in my mind as an Indigenous-led project. I think the other one is the capacity funds. So having resources offered to the communities, you know, on the range, I guess, of projects, and flexible use of it. So there's one community I know in James Bay, they stacked all three fundings to produce one report, three different one process for all three projects, three different reports for each of the things. So flexibility, I think, was there on the provincial resources being offered to communities. So I thought that was a best practice. And I think the level of collaboration. So here, today, is an example of best practice. We had the H Reform 1, H Reform 2, the Expo Gathering 1, I guess this is Expo Gathering 2, is, I would say, is a best practice. You know, they're funding 3 reps from each of the communities. They can exercise that or not, it's up to them. And they can talk to the proponents directly, not the technical team and the folks that are on the project management team. So.
Yes, miigwech for that. And these processes are so important. Last year, we had, or not last, well, it was last year. This past June, we had a gathering, and we had a special day included in that gathering for elders from all of the communities, so everyone can have their conversations with the WSR team, with the NRL team, and then the MF CAR team. And so these were more or less grassroots community dialogue. So we provided that space, and that was a pretty important space, and it was quite welcome. And so this one we're kind of combining the gathering and a little bit H-RE stuff with the breakout rooms and other things. So we're finding things that work, and as you've heard, we're constantly changing things around. And with that, we want to now move to, you heard this morning that the draft environmental assessment for MF CAR is out, and then the one for WSR is imminent. It's my new favorite word now. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and talk about the next 120 days, or the 120 days of consultation following the release of the draft environmental assessment. So first I'll go with Qasim.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Jennifer. It's, you know, the next 120 days are sort of about reviewing a large report. So the way the communities review the report is entirely up to them. Our first main job is to ensure that, you know, they've received the draft, that the way they wanted the draft, whether that's electronic or that's in print, it gets to the right people. And then I think one of the jobs that the regulator has, the provincial regulator on this, and Michael brought that up, is to ensure that, you know, there's funding and capacity available to the nations to undertake their own individual process for review, whatever that means for them, and they can decide to use those funds as they like. For the Community Access Road, we're making some additional dollars available to First Nations, and this was funding originally offered as part of collecting Indigenous knowledge at the community level. Every First Nation didn't take us up on it, so that left us with a bit of a surplus, which we wanted to deploy again. We wanted to make sure whatever we could do to support the review, we make that available to First Nations. So we're in the process of ensuring that, you know, those funds are out to communities to support their review process. Now, we've also made the review, I think, more accessible from an information sharing and dissemination perspective by creating these. I think they're really good looking handy dandy folders with summaries of all the reports. And it's got a USB stick in it with all of the information related to the environmental assessment draft. Then, of course, our main feedback to the nations is, this is your process. You decide the way you want to review it. Our main job during the 120 days is to be at your disposal. If you want to talk about the report, if you want us to come and present our findings to the community, we will be there in person, boots on the ground. You prefer an online meeting, we'll do that. You want to meet in Timmins and Thunder Bay and Toronto or PDAC, let's do that, absolutely. If that is not something you want to do, you want to just ask questions, let's do that. Like, so we're really at the disposal of the First Nations over the 120 days. For the first 60 days, we've dedicated that time entirely to the First Nations, just so that, we have that capacity to respond to First Nations immediately. And as those requests come in, as Mike's saying, there's a request from five communities to be there. That requires capacity on our part for our team members to have their time and the bandwidth to respond, to be there in person. So we've made sure we reserve that. So that's 60 days where we just want to dedicate our time to those conversations. After the first 60 days, we would become accessible for regulators and for the general public as well. So I think there might be a bit more running around in those last 60 days, but again, a big priority for us would be to ensure that if there's a request from an Indigenous nation, we prioritize that. We try to go in and to support that. So that's what the next 120 days look like from our perspective. We're going to follow the lead of the nations that are reviewing those documents themselves, understanding the fact that, some of them might not want to chat with us about this. They might want to chat with the regulators directly, and that's fine as well. So whatever process works for them, our job during this time is to be responsive and to be available.
All right, miigwech. So I was ready to mobilize, and so over to Michael.
Yeah, I think Webekwe and Martin Falls, this is voluntary. This draft review period is voluntary. There's nothing regulatory, statutory, on that. So we divided it up where, okay, let's give the Indigenous communities a longer review period versus the public review period, and that's the premise of the whole thing. Is it will take time, and everybody's going to be different, like in how they want to do it. Some will use consultants and do detailed assessment, or some will focus on certain chapters. It's different. I did this for Energy East. 46 or 47 First Nations, and everyone did it differently, and how they're going to do the report. And at the end of the day, here's the draft. What's your comments? And I would have to encourage the communities to increase the level of specificity, because they would just say water. Well, then, here's our mitigation measures for water, right? You have to be, I would have to coach them, be site specific. You know what I mean? So coaching them around the level of specificity. So draft report, how they review that, whether a lot of them did technical, and typically we would get a list. We would get a list, say it's here's 45 issues we have, with your report, and then we take those, and then we would put in, either alternative or enhanced mitigation measures. So 30 out of the 45 we put in there. Then we go back and talk to the community. This is how we did with Energy East, and then and they would disagree on the last 15. Fine. We'll just submit it as is, because we're not going beyond what we can as a proponent, and then so the Crown, in the final approval would review everything. That includes our proposed mitigation, and then they would add terms and conditions in the final approval. Things that either were they considered satisfactory, in terms of mitigation. So even that process was an engagement, right? Like the consultants that was involved, like they had to go in and explain. Suddenly they're explaining the project. They're explaining the baseline. They're explaining the alternative. I say, you should have done that in the beginning. It's like, no, you're catching up, right? Talking about the effects and cumulative effects and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting how each community does the review process. For WSR, the best way, of course, is sit down. Right? Like, here's the report. What sections are you most worried about? Let's have a conversation about the mitigation measures around that. So there's a meaningful thing rather than just paperwork. The paperwork is, I don't know if you guys done it before, but like it really is just a chart. Here's the issue. Here's our response. Here's the Crown's response, and the First Nations response. It's just that's not meaningful engagement with the community. It's really trying to, figure out what is the core set of concerns, of a community. And sometimes it could be caribou, it could be water, et cetera. So we don't know that, I don't know if they're going to be hung up on the detail, the engineering of a bridge, more so than the fish habitat. You know what I mean? Like, because we had that with Energy East, all this technical specificity of the pumping stations, and like, I don't think the community really wanted to know the engineering specificity of a pumping station. They want to know about the pipeline and if there was a spill and what would it go and where would the flow and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so it's different. Every community response to the report will be different. I already know that. And how they do it. Either it's going to be just purely a technical exercise by the consultant, or they're actually going to go in and talk about the report. So knowing that, I know WSR or CAR did it. They were trying to provide the tools to help with that.
Miigwech, and that's why we have a longer timeline to promote those very important discussions in community. So we are going to wrap things up, and I'm going to go to the floor first and ask if there's any questions. And Junior will have a mic. We have a question. Arlise has a question. Here.
Hello, Tansei. I've heard a lot of innovation with what you guys have all had to say, both Jen, Kazim, and Mike. I'm just curious if you can see the innovation from Indigenous-led projects continue to develop and disperse in broader capacities, and do you feel like this level of innovation with these Indigenous-led projects, do you feel that this is going to change the game for Indigenous-led infrastructure projects in Canada? And are we going to continue to see a rise of Indigenous-led projects in Canada because of this level of innovation?
I'll go first. I'll say yes, at least in Ontario. It's beyond just the project. Like the first, like Webakwe is in discussions with Ontario on the environmental monitoring, like beyond what's typically in an environmental impact assessment, as well as I don't know what the word is, governance or shared decision making. So when you go through the exercise, there's environmental commitments, and out of it is long-term contracts, and so there's a layered cake of things to do post-construction that community members, that at least Webakwe is thinking about around, it's almost like conservation, like land management, wildlife management, because that's what they're worried about. They're worried about Americans, anglers and hunters coming up and over-harvesting. They're worried about like all these different impacts. This is Webakwe members. And so we have to talk about that. They worry about community and public safety. So what does that mean? Well, we have to talk to Anishinaabe-Askli Police Services, and we did, the central commander within Matawa, and the sergeant said, right now, we're going to have a discussion, a broader discussion around our mandates on reserve. So take any NAPS officer right now, their mandate's on reserve. Soon as they get off on a road that's under the Highway Traffic Act, that's a different set of expectations for a NAPS officer. So they don't have the resources to patrol roads, if they're, on the public safety end of things. So it's a layered discussions around how they're going to put the mitigations measures for whatever concern that's being brought up, and that's where the innovation comes in, right? That's, are we going to have Indigenous conservation officers? That's on the table, right? It doesn't have to be M&R, Ministry of Natural Resources. It could be, it could be Indigenous guardians, doing that. So that's where the innovation comes. It's actually in the mitigation discussions, and that's the hope that innovative ideas come from the discussions when nation to nation, community to community.
Yeah, I think, first of all, projects like this, well, this is unprecedented in Ontario, but it's changed the landscape. And but the reality is projects like this are few and far between. We're not making a ton of highways. Well, it's funny that I say that. We're making more highways in Ontario right now than we've made in a long time. But even those are limited number of projects. But what this has done is it's created the dream. It's created the vision and the dream of Indigenous involvement in a much more deeper and meaningful level. So communities that are looking at their own resources and their own initiatives, they're no longer just thinking about, oh, if that proponent builds this, we might do this with that proponent. They're thinking that, but they're also thinking, maybe we could develop this project in our territory to service Ontarians, Canadians. Maybe we can sell this service to Americans. No, they're not saying that anymore. But could be, theoretically, could be. Yeah, maybe 4 years from now. But it's created, if I had to sort of summarize that, I think it's created a dream that's a newish dream. I don't want to say it's new for all communities out there, but it's definitely created something. It sort of planted a seed which is starting to grow, and it's growing rapidly.
All right, Miigwech, are there any other questions? I'm gonna do oh, we do have a question.
When you're speaking about the consultation taken with communities in the north, or Indigenous communities, versus maybe some conversations you had in the past with more like urban or settler communities or whatever, what are the sort of the biggest differences that you've seen in terms of maybe uptake? Like one thing you were saying, Mike, very few, like I would feel when you said, it's only when you're person to person do you hear a lot of positive feedback. I feel that's sort of across the board in a lot of experiences that I have, where it's always the squeaky wheel that squeaks the most or whatever, and you don't get a lot of that positive feedback. So do you feel that that's sort of the same in communities, or what kind of differences or similarities would you see in these different audiences?
That's a very good question. I think in person, and I'm not being biased. Because I wish there was a systematic way of doing this. Are you for it? Are you interested in it? But I would say the majority, 60%, maybe 65, is more favorable. Because people, it depends on who you are, how you think, right? So if you're thinking of, oh, this is going to improve the life of communities, those two communities, Webequie or Martin Falls, because those that know how expensive it is to fly out now, or these remotes, that a road, or if you're an elder that has to do medical, the travel, that's an extravagant exercise for an elder, to go to the hospitals and medical appointments. So and sometimes the plane can't land because of the fog. I remember, I think, Stephen, we were in a community, remember there was a patient that had to go out. And the plane couldn't land. Did he pass away? Yeah, he passed away. It was sad. Like, if they had a road, he would have been in Sioux Lookout in probably 9 hours. But the plane couldn't land because of the fog. So, real world lived experience, the community members know this. So those community members that left their remote communities to come to, whatever, Timmins, Sioux Lookout, Thunder Bay, they know. Like, they know. So when they show up at our open forums, they want to drive up, kind of thing. So I would say it's more majority. NGOs, like they just show up and they're opposing it. They just, I did a presentation at Lakehead University and they showed up. It was for the students. It was supposed to be for the native students, but they showed up, these non-native NGOs, and made a ruckus, ruined the pizza. I said, can you just grab a pizza and be quiet for a bit? I said, let me finish my presentation, kind of thing. But they were looking for work. Why do people go to school? It's not a big philosophical question. To get a job. If you don't want a job, you don't have to go to school to read. You can be on welfare and use the public library. Okay? Seriously, the only reason, why do you go to school? To get a job, right? It's, to look for, some type of meaningful work. And so these students are at the college universities showed up for this, and then suddenly you had non-native protesters, interrupting while these guys are wondering if there's jobs for them at the end of their graduation. So it's hard to measure, because they're on a campaign, how we're, I guess, public opinion versus general understanding versus the media. The media, as you know, is if it bleeds, it reads. It leads. Okay, it reads too. So if it's bad news, in 95, and that's why you follow me on LinkedIn. I call it Indigenous bright spots, because it's like 5% of the news. 95% of Indigenous news is negative. It's issues, it's crisis, it's sad. It's just negative news, or it's framed negatively, so I'm always trying to show where the bright spots are for the youth, because it's not all bad. I grew up listening all the bad stuff. It does affect your psyche. It really does. As an Indigenous person growing up in this society in the 70s and 80s, it does affect your psyche. In fact, my mom told me, he goes, Mike, I go to these meetings. He goes, I hear people talk about the problems very technically, very eloquently, very rhetorically, even poetically. I said, they're experts on the problems. Be an expert on the solution. That's what my mom said. So that's why I'm here.
Costin, would you like to weigh in on that?
I think Mike's covered like a remarkable amount of ground with that answer. Just going to add one small tidbit there, Dorothy. I think the starting part of your question was sort of more urban communities versus remote communities. I'm just going to pick one thing up over there to say, I find hopes and aspirations across the board are very similar. I think Michael talked about it in a slightly different way as well, but fundamentally it boils down to hopes and aspirations. And I definitely find every time I've been to a community, whether that's sort of in Southern Ontario or the far north, and we talk about a project, next steps on development, people talk in a remarkably articulate and reasonable way, by and large. And the problems they highlight are fundamental challenges with that approach, with that project. And as long as you're able to address that, people are, by and large, aligned with positive change. Now, that's of course very subjective, and I'm making a very broad statement. I realize that, but I think that's been my experience by and large. Maybe you see degrees of capacity, you see degrees of cumulative effect that communities have faced, certainly more so in the South. But if you go to Martin Falls and you talk about this project, people will talk about cumulative impacts of the damming of the rivers. I've been to Martin Falls a number of times, at least 2 years in the past, where the Albany River was bone dry. You could walk across the Albany. So even that's a common theme between communities in the South. If you're like in a place like Mississauga to the credit, people will talk about all of those issues. The only difference might be that there's a bit more capacity at the consultation department. So just wanted to highlight that.
I think I actually want to jump in on that a little bit. You're asking about the differences, and I want to really simplify that and hope I'm not speaking tongue-in-cheek here, but I would say that Indigenous communities look at these in a much more holistic way, where when I'm looking at the public and or stakeholders, they're keeping track of the timeline so they can have access to jobs. So I think simplifying it that way is how I view that. So one more question, if there are any more, and I'm going to feel like a bingo announcer. Going once, going twice, 3 times closed. All right, Chimigwech, and I'm going, let's give these guys a hand. And if anybody has any questions later today or has any comments and they'd like to talk to Michael and Qasim, they'll be around today and tomorrow. And Steve, Miigwech.
Miigwech, great panel. Kaz and Mike and Jen will be around, so if you have any other questions, we did offer before, if people are shy and don't want to stand up with a microphone, go up and ask questions to specific individuals, or even write it down, write your question down, and provide it to the registration desk, and they'll make sure that somebody gets the question and that you get a response. Okay, so housekeeping. I think we finally worked out the logistics for the breakout rooms. We're going to assign a breakout room to each of the projects, and representatives from IAC will be holding office in the plenary room. So I'm not going to go through all the rooms and the locations. They have it at the registration desk. And all you need to do is just check in before you go to your session as to which room you need to be going to and what time. You probably already know what time. You just need to know what room. I'm not going to come back after lunch. So 1 o'clock, the breakout sessions will start. I think every room but the Northern Road Link has a 1 o'clock meeting. But again, even for project team, check the registration for the different groups that are coming in, what time and what room you're going to be going to. There's a question. Do we have a mic still, Junior?
It's really quick. You can hear me. The Ontario, are we with IAC? Are we down here still, or where are the Ontario reps located?
Why don't you guys duke it out between yourselves and IAC as to which corner of the room? I think it would probably benefit everybody if you were separate from the Expo. So, I mean, we got lots of tables here, right? So, do you want to pick a corner? Yeah?
Steve, I think we'll be rotating the rooms, the breakout rooms.
No, but IAC and Ontario don't have a breakout room.
Yeah, so I think what they'll do is the first hour will be the projects, or if Northern Road Link doesn't have one, then they'll put that in IAC in one of those rooms for 1 o'clock. But we'll let you know about registration.
So everything emanates from registration, right? Sorry, we tried to make it as simple as we could. And another reminder about the expos and the passports. If you haven't got your passports, they're available at the registration desk, as well as the workbooks, or whatever they're called. And the draw will be tomorrow at the end of proceedings, and we're still figuring out when that will be. and we'll get back to you with an update as soon as we have it. But make sure you've got your passports. My suggestion would be get them done today, because depending on flight times and everything else, we may truncate the expo and breakout room sessions tomorrow. So to be safe in terms of the draw, my suggestion would be try and get your passports and workbooks done today. Enjoy your lunch.